Are you wondering how to break the stigma around mental health issues and the impact that it's having on our African American and other disenfranchised communities? If you are, join us, your hosts, MERENCIA HENSON, LaCretia Lee, and WALANDA Johnson on our Mindful Moments mental health radio show every second and fourth Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as we dive into a mindful dialogue to empower, inform, and bring awareness to the positive impact of mental health wellness. Good evening, everyone. I am one of your hosts. My name is MERENCIA HENSON. I am an associate clinical social worker here in San Diego. I work with children, adolescents, and adults that have pervasive and severe mental health disorders, as well as intellectual disabilities. We also have with us co-host LaCretia Lee.
Hi, my name is LaCretia Lee. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work at one of our local jails as a clinician assessing for suicide ideation. And basically what that means is that I'm assessing to make sure that they're placed in housing areas that are safe for themselves and others.
Hi, and I'm the third part of this beautiful triad of hosts. My name is WALANDA Johnson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work in private practice helping clients work through their anxieties, their life issues, women issues, and helping them just manage and reduce their stresses so that they can move forward in their lives.
Well, we are so glad that you all are with us. I know a lot is going on around this country, but we just thank God, and we thank our village who support us, who care for us, and we have one another. So again, just thank you for tuning in to our show this evening. We're very appreciative, and we're excited just to jump in. Tonight, we're going to be discussing PTSD and how it impacts our Black and Brown communities. So majority of the time, a lot of people, when they think of PTSD, they feel like, or they're just they don't really understand or know how there is PTSD real in urban areas. A lot of times people feel like, it's only military individuals that go to war that come back with PTSD, right? But statistically, there's more individuals, minorities that live in urban areas that have a higher crime and violent rate, that percentage, where they actually have more individuals that have PTSD that live in urban neighborhoods than actually individuals that are in the military that go to war. So I think that's very important for everyone to know and to acknowledge that, PTSD looks different depending on, where you're at and your experience in life. And so let's just jump right in.
Hi, yeah. I like how you say that, Merencia, PTSD, and for most people know what it is because we use it so much, but it's post-traumatic stress disorder. And like Merencia said, many people associated with the war because clearly it should be, different wars and things, but it's so much more broader than that.
Right.
And we're going to get into it, but the manual, like the Bible that clinicians use to help diagnose patients, it came out with a new one in 2013, and it's the fifth version, and it expanded the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorders. So it's not just fear and anxiety based; it includes some other things. For example, the condition characterized by the inability to experience pleasure that you would normally consider a pleasurable experience, as well as in intense states of distress and unease. And I think many of us have been in situations where we normally would experience pleasure by watching something or doing something or even eating something, and we no longer find that pleasurable. But generally, it's for a short period of time, or times when we feel uneasy. Just the state of our country is uneasy. You understand? So yeah, it's a lot more of us are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder or forms of PTSD.
And another thing too that's wanted to elaborate on that's in the DSM-5 relating to PTSD and the criteria. And one is, and it's straight from the DSM, is exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. So direct experience. So that's if you're actually in the midst of that violent situation that occurred. If you witnessed something that happened that it's affecting you, so whether it's seeing a sibling, a family member, a friend get murdered, for an example, right in front of you, as well as learning that the traumatic events occurred to a close family member or a close friend. In case of actual or threatened death of a family member or friend, the event must have been violent or accidental. And like we know, when you're experiencing something like that, right, it's going to affect you psychologically. It's going to affect you mentally, emotionally, physically. And, some of the symptoms that we also wanted to go over is intrusive memories. So many of times what people think of is the flashbacks, right? So let's just say somebody, let's just say for the sake of conversation, 17-year-old adolescent, Black male. He was outside of his house. He witnessed his best friend right next to him getting shot and murdered. And let's just say on that street, there was something significant that occurred, or he saw something. So let's just say months later, or even days later, if he saw somebody that looked like his cousin, that flashback of that traumatic experience can come back into his mind. That's going to allow him to relive that situation that occurred. Did you want to add anything, Lucretia?
No, you're right on it. And I
Okay.
never got to get further into it, but just speaking about some of our urban communities, heck, I grew up in an urban community.
Mm,
Drive-bys, real,
Mhm.
real
Mhm.
thing,
yeah.
and even though it was real and more common than not sometimes, it's like you hear a car backfire or something and you're
Mm,
hitting the ground
mhm,
Yes.
mhm,
because
mhm.
you've seen the tragedy that comes from it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was
And,
thinking
and
in your
that's,
example, Marencia, like not, not even seeing someone that looks like his cousin, but let's say, the person who did the drive-by, they drove a red Cadillac.
mhm,
You see,
mhm,
when you see that red Cadillac and you see a symbol that sticks out to you that happened in
mhm,
that incident,
Yeah.
um, or that you saw in that incident, and you see it afterwards, that can trigger it too. It doesn't necessarily have to
mhm.
be like the seeing the human person, or
Exactly.
but just seeing something that, like an item,
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's familiar with that situation.
Absolutely. Or
Yeah.
smell. Or you
Yeah.
might be
Yes, right?
your family gathering, you guys are
Mm,
barbecuing, a song,
Yeah.
it can be a number
wow.
of
Yeah.
things that can trigger. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And a key thing too when it comes to the diagnosing is when the situation, it affects you in different ways, right? So let's just say, because I had a client, he was sexually assaulted on the bus,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
affected his life in the sense where he would not go on the bus. He was a young man. I think he was like 20, 21.
Right.
So anytime he looked at a bus, anytime he drove by a bus, he was like, no, like I cannot look at it. I don't want to even stand next to a bus, because every single time he knew that a bus was about to come, he was getting a panic attack. He was getting anxious. His hands were starting to sweat or
Mhm.
get sweaty because, again, that flashback occurred
Mhm.
in his mind as if it was just yesterday of what
Yeah.
happened to him when he got assaulted on the bus.
Right.
And then again, it's so important to receive help, because now or at the time, he didn't want to go to work. You know what I mean? Or there was times where he wanted to work, but he knew, okay, the only way I can get to work is by getting on the
Wow.
bus.
Okay.
So again, it affects your finances, right? It
Mm.
And
affects your
your daily
livelihood.
functioning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just your day-to-day functioning.
right,
Yeah.
right. And you know how it is in DC, like you have to get on the bus. A lot of people don't have cars, or they just don't want to get a car with, like, the transportation is the metro or the bus. So again, it really stops you from really living the life that you want to live because of that traumatic situation that occurred to you.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
What's another
So
one?
Yeah, another one is avoidance. So we kind of just talked about that
Yeah.
right now. So like for
Mhm.
him, for an example, he would avoid getting on the bus. He would avoid,
Okay.
walking on the same side of the street where there was a bus stop. So that's avoidance, right? Or like you said, Lucretia, let's just say, going back to the 17-year-old young man, if he knew that they were going to go to a barbecue and somebody, like, let's just say a family member had a red Cadillac, he might not even go to the barbecue, right?
Mhm.
So it's just that really affects them in so many ways.
Right. Right.
Wow.
And then another one is negative changes in thinking and mood. And when I think of that, again, if you're suppressing your symptoms of PTSD, again, if you're not really getting the help that you need, whether it's lack of insurance, right? Or
Mhm.
like we talked about in other episodes, not believing that therapy is going to help you, just, again, still trying to break that stigma in our
Right.
communities to go to therapy, you may be suppressing the symptoms. So now you're angry at everybody, right? Because you're trying to grieve the loss of your friend. And
Mhm.
like, well, why is it that, every time you're around me, so and so, you're always mad, you agitated, like you always want to fight somebody. And that's because in his thought process and through the thinking, he's still in the back of his mind, still in that day that occurred when his cousin got murdered. So the in his mind, he really still hasn't recovered or really
Right.
even grieved
Through it.
From that loss, that tragic loss.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that makes me think about, I know we're going to get into this more, makes me think about like all of our, Black and brown people in our urban communities that experience daily trauma. I have a client who lives in either Watts or Compton. I think it's Compton. And he just talks about like the people that he's lost.
Mm.
And it's almost like it is what it is, and I'm like,
Wow.
whoa, like this
Mhm.
is severe. Like you've been surrounded by that like almost your whole life, not to mention
He's
your
numb
own
to
family
it.
trauma, but just the
Mhm.
trauma of the neighborhood he grew up in. And and he's like, I'm starting to connect why I'm so angry about things. I'm starting to want to
Yeah.
explore that trauma because I don't want to continue just being hypersensitive. And I know we'll talk about more of the
Yeah. Yeah.
symptoms
Yeah.
and being angry and
Mhm.
being on edge and all of those things that
Mhm.
come with that.
And as we're
Mhm.
talking, we'll see like a lot of these things overlap. So I'm thinking like avoidance and also negative changes in thinking and mood. When you talk about the young man who's had so much loss, I mean, the losses are real. You know what I mean? And like,
Mhm.
we understand the anger, and, and even I go a little further with it. I'm thinking about not only has he lost relationships, but then it's like it can
Mm.
hinder him from wanting to establish new relationships,
Right.
Mm,
as
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
as the relationships he may have. Only let himself go so far in terms of his emotions and what have you.
yeah.
You
Mhm.
understand? Like, that he
Mhm.
may have
Hmm.
them, but
And
it's like
suppressing it.
absolutely. And so may
Mhm.
not get the fullness of this individual's,
Mhm.
life and experience and stuff. So yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
It's good.
And there was another one, Marencia.
Yeah, so the other one is changes in emotional reaction. So again, we kind of the outburst, aggressive behavior, irritability,
Mm,
anger, overwhelming guilt or shame, as well as self-destruction. And
mm,
I know that we discussed this in other episodes, but again, let's just say, the 17-year-old boy, right, that seen his cousin get murdered, if what he's seen his whole life is, okay, well, when mommy, daddy, auntie, uncle, when things happen to them, when so-and-so died, they go to drugs, they go to alcohol, they start going to abusing,
Mm,
other individuals around them, right? What is he going to do? He's
mm,
going to do the same thing. Or, there could be, a Black and brown family where, you know what, we go to church, we go to God, we're going to talk about this, we're going to push through as a family. So depending on how your family deals with stressors, especially when it comes to a severe situation of getting, having somebody murdered in your family or in your neighborhood, that's how you're going to deal with it. So again, it's so important that we educate each other, we educate our family members, our friends, our clients, the healthy ways of dealing with this, so that when the flashback does come, when they are triggered, when the, you know, the anniversary of the cousin comes up, they have the appropriate, you know, village support system that can happen to them. Because I mean, even just for our for the folks that are watching right now, there's 5 stages of grief, right, ladies? There's denial, there's anger, there's acceptance, there's bargaining, and there's depression. So, you know, yes, you're going to feel angry. Yes, you are going to have sadness, but it's about when that feeling does come, what do you do with that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that piece about the social support, because it's so very necessary in the healing process of, you know, healing trauma as a whole. But even with PTSD, which is also obviously trauma related, that social support and the health of that social support is so very important and necessary, and almost foundational to be able to heal through that process, whether it's with a therapist, your family, close friends. It's so very, very important. And we'll talk more about, you know, that later, but I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah. What did you want to say something, Lucretia?
No, I mean, I was just thinking about, I don't know if someone already is going to cover it, but in terms of when we think about our communities, urban communities, and people experiencing stress, is there any stats out there that talks about male versus female, like the number of males versus females that experience stress, or as well as seek help and things like that?
I think what I was looking at before is that there's more, I want to say more women that actually try to seek help when they are diagnosed with PTSD. I think it's culturally, as well as, again, you know, the way that your family deals with stress. Because, you know, as women, I think we're more talkative, we're more outspoken about it. And like we talked about before, you know, in a different episode, you know, in our communities, as a male, you know, many of times, you know, brown and black boys are raised like, you know, you don't talk about your feelings, you have to man up, you're a man, you know, you can't talk, you can't cry. So now you're a man. And then, you know, if you have years and years and years of trauma of experiencing this type of violence and deaths around you, going to explode. And that's what I share with my clients. You know, as our body is like a volcano. So if you have layers and layers of trauma, you're diagnosed, or maybe you're undiagnosed, right? And many a times our people in our communities are undiagnosed with PTSD. So what's going to happen with all of that layer of anger and trauma and violence? You're going to erupt. And when it erupts, sometimes hurt people, right? Whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, or you killing somebody because of all that anger that's deep inside.
I think I read the same thing too, Merencia, where it's like males experience more trauma, but the females are more likely to get help and be diagnosed with PTSD. And I'm thinking about working in the jail, and many of the men, like I said, it's a revolving door. They come in and out of jail, in and out of jail. And I would have to say the vast majority of them are open to processing, you know, their feelings. They want the one-on-one time and what have you. What I have noticed is, culturally speaking, specifically Hispanic males, Mexican American males, it's like many of them, if they are sharing cells with other Mexican Americans, and some of those males don't condone therapy or help or medication. They may say, no, I decline. No, I refuse. However, if a deputy goes and get them and just say, I need you to come with me, and they come to the clinic, they're very happy to be there. You understand what I'm saying? And so the vast majority of them put in requests for therapy, and they want to process their feelings and what have you. And it's just it's interesting. So I think if everything, perfect storm, if everything is right, if men know that they're not going to be condemn,
It's gonna be in private too.
provided information to seek it, and and everything lines up. I think many more men would be more accepting of therapy.
And that's why I was wondering, Lucretia. I was like, I bet if it was in private, or like, oh, my family's not gonna know, you know what I mean? My friends not gonna know, my cellmates are not gonna know, then yeah, I'm gonna go in and see Lucretia, the therapist, knowing that I can get this out without feeling, oh, you weak, why are you going in there? Oh, you can't do it by yourself. So I could totally see why and how, some men would be more reserved depending on who's around them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And because it's a conversation.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? And so even though we're having a conversation, as a trained clinician, I'm picking up things, and I'm hearing things, and I'm putting things back. And they, after, it's like, this was just, I like talking to you, and so things start coming together, and it's really breaking down the stigma of what they thought therapy is. And I will have to say, they don't see very many clinicians that look like me. You understand what I'm saying?
Especially in San Diego.
And so I'm bringing a little something different there, just for the sheer nature that I'm an African American Christian woman. I am who I am. And so
and that's why it's so important that, we talk about this offline of having our own private practice, right? Like continuing to be in the field of therapeutic services, because I think that really helps when you know that your therapist looks like you. We may have different lifestyles, we may have different backgrounds, but just to know, like, oh, you get me, you know what I mean? Just culturally or whatnot. It's so important. Another thing that I wanted to address is children that experience PTSD. I know that when I was working as a therapist in DC, and I was going in the school system, many Black and Brown children had a lot of behavioral issues. And it was really sad because as a social worker, as a therapist, you want to dig deep. You want to, like, why is he always trying to leave the classroom? Why is he always being so defiant? And again, they're children. So, there was times where I would talk to the parents and they would just say, and this God honest truth, just last night, there was gunshots. My son, so-and-so, my daughter, so-and-so, I had to get on the floor. I had to tell them to hide. Another time, which was another family, there was a drive-by. The bullet went through the window, almost hit their knees. So you're thinking, as a social worker, as a therapist, it makes sense why he can't sit still. It makes sense why he's acting up, because he has all of these feelings going on inside of him that he can't even express himself, and then he's going to get in trouble for it. Now you're yelling at him, and it's only going to amplify the symptoms of what he's already going through. And I think it's so important that teachers and other like personnel in schools really try to dig deep of why does he have this behavior, instead of the surface like, oh, he's just talking back, oh, he's just acting out. No, let's get to the bottom of what is really going on. Another example, kind of off topic of PTSD, but if our Black and Brown children are not having breakfast, you know what I mean? They don't know when the next meal is going to come. Teacher, why is he falling asleep? It's because he's tired. He didn't get a lot of sleep because of the gun violence or because of the abuse that's going on.
Or because he's taking care of the younger kids in the family. I'm so glad you said that, because I cringe when people tell me, oh, they so bad. I cringe. I hate.
Me too.
I hate when I hear people tell me that a child is bad. Because like you said, there's something underneath that. And what you're talking about is trauma-informed care. Like everybody that deals with children needs to be trained in trauma-informed care, because 100%. All behaviors are motivated by something. No child, unless they're a sociopath, which you don't really diagnose until they're an adult.
Yeah, exactly.
Is just that way because they just came out. Being like Lucifer's child. Like, no, like there's stuff that is going on that's going on with that child. And to just be dismissive, you're only perpetuating that whole cycle. And then they grow up and repeat that cycle to children or people in their lives, and it just keeps going.
Understanding and advocacy are so important.
It is.
I remember when I used to work for our school district, I worked with the family, and I went to the school to meet with a couple of brothers, young guys, young kids, and they had a lot of absences, a lot of tardies.
Mm.
And the school wanted to not only punish the kids, but punish the parents.
The parents.
What's going on? And long story short, the kids were hungry. You know what I mean? And so, or speaking about not coming to school, so it was one day I went to see them. They weren't at school. They lived very close to the school, and I'm like, there's no reason why they shouldn't be at school in terms of transportation. Went to the house, come to find out that there were this particular family had cousins, and the cousins were a rival gang.
Wow.
And there were some issues at the home, fighting and gunshots, and the door was broken. And so the lock didn't work. And so the mother wanted the kids to stay home while she went to seek help in fixing the lock, because a few things they had of value, they didn't want them stolen. So the kids were at home on watch.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And the school doesn't know that, and I'm not even sure the school can do anything about that, but understanding the young people that you work with, some of the things that they may be dealing with, just the empathy, trauma informed, like you said, care, can make the world a difference in a child's life.
And, they've also started doing, and I wish they would have this in more schools, instead of detention, they had actually like yoga meditation for the kids in like urban areas. And they've literally saw a decrease in the aggressive behaviors with children, because again, and that was like the most frustrating thing at times working with children. I know you guys can definitely relate to this. Sometimes working with the parents, because, the parents like, well, he's just bad and, he's just acting out. But how do you react to stress? Like, how do you react when you're hungry or things don't go? Well, if you cussing people out, or if you're fighting so-and-so, well, that's why your 5-year-old is doing it. That's why your 12-year-old is doing it. You know what I mean? So sometimes you really have to look at the family system and have a meeting, and like I said, not to discipline the parent, but more of that education.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? But one thing I do want to say is that, there are many Black and Brown families that are not like that, right? Like we have Black and Brown families, like how we were raised, that, do really well with their children. But, I think it's so important that we really educate more teachers and having some more trainings of that underlying behavior, instead of just looking at so-and-so of what the behavior is.
Right. Have the conversations. Make the conversations a regular part of interaction.
And have empathy, because at the end of the day, they're just kids. You know what I mean? Like Walanda said, they're just not going to be born like, hey, I feel like acting up today. No, they're learning about this world. They're still learning about, how do I function as a 5-year-old? If you really think about 5 years in this world, it's really not a lot of time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going through the comments here. So
What do we have?
We'll just have commentary, not necessarily too many questions, but just listeners relating to like what we're saying, as far as having, the importance of having like Black therapists and representation, and understanding like there's a why to behaviors instead of just because,
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. No, Walanda, you were going to share some great stuff with us.
Yeah, sorry, my internet just okay. So I'm kind of combining two things that I learned. So in thinking about the physiological reaction to chronic trauma. I often hear when I'm working with clients is, I go from 0 to 100, and like nobody goes from 0 to 100. If you're familiar with positive discipline, Jane Nelson talks about the brain and palm. And so I just kind of want to share a little bit of that and and mix that with the physiology of trauma, or people who
Sure.
experience chronic trauma. So if you think about, you know, your brain in your palm, literal palm, and you hold it up and you make this shape right here. This right here is your amygdala, which is your animalistic brain. So that's like the fight, flight, freeze. Like there's
Okay.
no logical reasoning in that at all. This is your brainstem where all the messages come up, and then you fold this over, and this is your logical brain. So where all the reasoning and everything comes from. And so what we think, people go from, oh, I'm logical, I'm calm, I can reason, to, oh, I'm just like fight or flight. And that's not true. People with common trauma, if you say scale 1 to 10, if you're constantly in trauma, your neighborhood is constantly violent, you're experiencing abuse, whether you're a child or an adult, you're experiencing PTSD, you don't start at 0.
Right.
You start maybe at the least 7. So 7 to 10 is nothing. That's like that's not even a jump. That's like a giant step, a big step.
Okay.
So just remembering that, it, you know, if you're feeling like it's quick for you to get angry, or quick for you to get dysregulated, not saying that it's directly connected to trauma, because it could be some other mental health things going on. But if you've had trauma, that's probably why.
Okay.
And so we have, you know, I know, Lucretia, you're going to talk about the treatment modalities that we have to help you learn how to not come in at a 7, and to come in and to be able to get to a 1 or a 0, or start at a 1 and a 0 instead of going from 7 to 10. Because again, no one goes from I'm all the way calm to I'm all the way animalistic brain and not rational. Nobody does that. It's usually a gradual progression. But if you're in a constant state of trauma, or chronic, you're experiencing chronic trauma, your cortisol levels are super high. So your adrenaline, all that stuff is super high, and you're very hypervigilant. So you're on edge. You're already, like I said, at a 7. So anything that sets you off, you're at a 10, like that. Because your body's cortisol, your body's like already keeping count of the trauma that you experienced, that you didn't process, that you didn't learn how to heal from. Your body, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, your body remembers experiencing that trauma, experiencing that adrenaline rush. And so it's very important to be aware of that. And, you know, we'll talk about, you know, things you can do in a moment. But the main thing that we've talked about here, and we said it like repeatedly, is get treatment.
Yeah. And I think, and thank you for sharing all of this, Walanda, because a couple of things that I was thinking about right now is, again, the importance of getting therapy. Because again, like, let's just say, you know, every time you see Uncle so-and-so, right, who may have sexually abused you, whether you're a male or female, if you, one, have trust issues with adults, right, because maybe let's just say this happened when you're a child, and then anytime you see this person, like you said, you're going to feel anxious, you're going to feel scared, your heart is going to be pounding, your hands are sweaty. So anything that may trigger you, whether it's a house, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, you're going to have those triggers. And it's so important to know, okay, if I'm about to be at this family event, or if I'm about to be at this home or place that's going to trigger me, it's so important to know, okay, what can I do so that my anxiety doesn't increase, or that I'm not always, like you said, on edge where I feel like I have to put up this guard because I don't feel safe. So, you know, that's another reason why it's so important to really get help, is to understand before I hit this crisis in my head of what's going on due to the flashbacks or triggers, I can use these healthy coping skills to really try to de-escalate, you know, these feelings that are going on, so that I can feel safe. Because if you don't feel safe, how can you have healthy relationships? If you don't trust people, how can you have healthy relationships with anything or anyone, you know?
And I also wanted to just share an example of things that we might consider minor. So maybe you haven't experienced any type of like physical trauma, what have you. I like what you said, a lot of how like well, both of you guys said, brown and black people, a lot of times we don't operate at a zero. You know, we live in a world and we experience day-to-day
Oppression.
circumstances that we don't operate as a zero. We know how to maintain and be professional and go by day to day.
Wow.
We might be at a 3 or 4, you know.
You're
So
right.
I'm just being real. And so for
Especially
me,
when you have anxiety. Like I know a lot of people that suffer from anxiety. So if you're always irritable and you're moody, it's because that anxiety is affecting you where you can't really even function. So like you said, how can you stay at a 0-1 if you're already on edge?
right?
Or depressed, because there's a lot of depression in the Black community.
Yeah, and anxiety and depression goes hand in hand.
But I was going to say just knowing thyself. You understand? And so for example, something that I'm very conscious of is that I don't like lines, right? I don't like to drive around for 45 minutes looking for a parking space. I don't like to be cut off if I find a parking space. I don't like to be in crowds where people think that they can get in front of me and just disregard. So there's a whole lot of things I know I don't care about. And when it's holidays, for example, Christmas time and times where you're going out, you want to buy to spread your love and what have you. I know that you have that increase of anxiety and feelings and stuff going on in environments. So I will intentionally stay away from malls and stores because I know I'm already operating with low tolerance. I already know that about myself. And so I'm going to either shop online and or if I go to the store, I'm going to go when it first opened, you know, just to mitigate the possibility of me running into someone or something that it's just not a good recipe. And so, and that's just me knowing me.
Yeah.
You know,
That's so good. I'm glad you said that because it made me think about last Wednesday. Because I was in the dark. I didn't know what was going on at the Capitol until someone was like, I hope you're safe out there in North Carolina. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, why are you telling me this? And then I found out, and I'm very careful when, you know, when things happen with Ahmaud, when things happen with Brother Floyd, when things happen with Breonna, I'm very careful about how much social media I take in because I know that it'll trigger me. Even when Kobe died, like I know, like, you know, that's not necessarily traumatic or, you know, whatever, but I'm very careful with the amount of news that, you know, that goes on, especially when there's police brutality. Because I'm re-triggered about, now I have never experienced police brutality, thank God, but I'm re-triggered about all the incidents of discrimination, prejudice, all those instances that happen to me. And then it makes me angry all over again. So I, you know, like you're talking about the mall, I'm talking about like, there were a lot of Black people that were like, that's not what happened when Black Lives Matter, you know, and super upset. And I get it. And I understand, I'm there with you. But at the same time, I have to be careful about how much intake I take in because I don't, I got to keep my anger. I got to show up for clients, you know? So it's so true.
Real talk.
Exposure is important, being aware of those triggers with exposure to certain things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we were talking about tools. The number one I think we all can agree on is seeking help and seeking treatment to help make sense of the trauma that you experience, but also to be validated because oftentimes we can experience trauma. I've had clients that say I was sexually assaulted. I talked to my friends and they were like, well, but you were drunk. And it was your fault, you know? And so being in a space where in therapy, your therapist will validate your experience. And it doesn't sound like it might be super therapeutic or super helpful, but it is so important for your experience to be validated. So getting that help from a professional. If you're experiencing an episode, we talk a lot about mindfulness on this show, a lot of deep breathing, breath work, being able to talk yourself down. These are probably tools that you would learn in your treatment. some movement, whether it's taking a walk somewhere, just getting out of the space that you're in, connecting with others. We talked a lot about support and having those healthy relationships, and proactively just having a healthy lifestyle, whether that's being active, whether that's eating foods that are nourishing and healthy for you. So those are some ways, like in those moments if you're having a PTSD episode, we talk about, I've talked with clients about using your senses to help ground yourself. So touch, sight. If you can use taste, I don't necessarily recommend taste because people don't necessarily have food on deck. But hearing, I feel like I'm always missing one.
Sight?
Smell.
Smell.
So I usually use touch because that's the easiest one. So if you're feeling like you're overwhelmed and you're having an anxiety attack, touch the wall, put your hand in your pocket, think about like what you're touching, rub your hands together, wash your hands, and be in the moment of that sensory, so that your mind is focused on that.
I even had individuals that actually would hold like a marble or rock always in their pocket, because it allows them to know that they're present and that they're not back in that trauma.
Yes. That's the whole purpose of that. Yeah, to be in that moment of, oh, the soap feels like this, and oh, my hands feel smooth, or they feel calloused, or you know, I could feel the ridges in my fingertips or in my palms. So just being able to kind of bring yourself into what's going on right now, instead of, you know, those intrusive thoughts.
And that's what I was gonna say too. It's like, you know, I even share with my individuals that suffer from PTSD is to journal. So just getting it all out. I mean, it doesn't matter if you put periods, commas, like if your words are just all over the place. It's just so important to get it all out, as well as even if you have to put, like, even write out, and one of the individuals that was very helpful, rational versus irrational.
Okay.
To visualize it, to write out, and to see it on paper is also, or it could be very helpful as well. It's like, okay, it's not real. This is why it's not real. I am at home. I feel safe. And just writing it down and then to visualize it, it really can calm you, as well as lowering your anxiety, knowing that you're reading right in front of you what is really real, and to be more present.
Yeah. This might be a good place to just to share a little bit about evidence-based practices, psychotherapy practices. And so there's many practices that have been approved by American Psychological Associations and other organizations, but some of them are trauma-focused treatments, and some are considered non-trauma focused treatments. And I'll just share a couple of examples of each. And so one of the trauma-focused treatments is called prolonged exposure therapy. And this particular therapy has proven to be pretty helpful, very successful. And basically it says focuses on altering fear structures so that they are no longer problematic. And so the way I like to kind of think about this particular one is that many people are scared of. Some of them are many people are scared of spiders. And so, for example, it may look something like talking about what are you actually afraid of that is going to crawl on you, is going to bite you, is going to whatever. And so you're taking like some of the real things that you're afraid of. You have to actually have spiders, whether it's a real spider, whether it's a video, what have you. So make that present. And then you want to bring in information that's real information to let you know, like, well, the spider is not big enough to carry you off. If it crawls on you, you know, your skin is not gonna, you know, explode. You may not even feel it, or it may feel like this. And so you're really exposing the person to the particular thing that they are afraid of. And it's, you know, it's been considered very successful. Another trauma-focused treatment is called cognitive processing therapy. And it's altering the beliefs enough in order to accommodate new learning. So it kind of fits in with prolonged exposure therapy, because you're taking a belief and you're providing information that actually shows what is inaccurate about the feelings that you're holding.
And that's really good for clients that have had trauma with a car accident, whether they got really, like if they got injured really bad, or like someone that they loved in the car died. And then those clients are like, I never want to get in a car again, right? Like if I get in a car again, I'm afraid I'm gonna get in another car accident. I may die in the car accident. And by having that exposure therapy, just sit in the car, put on your seatbelt, just sit in it. And then the next step may be, okay, now just turn it on.
Right.
It's gonna be
Absolutely.
okay. And this little baby steps, okay, now we're only gonna drive around the corner.
Right.
Just really taking those exposure
Yeah.
steps to feel more comfortable in the car, for an example.
Absolutely. Did a couple of non-trauma focused therapies. It's the opposite. It's going to incorporate things to help you relax. So one of it's called stress inoculation training, and specifically it reads like it helps patients prepare themselves in advance to handle stressful events, to minimize getting upset if you find yourself in the event. And that's again a stress inoculation training. And when I think about this particular type of therapy, I'm thinking about what Black and Brown people, at least in my family, we do all the time with our children as they become of age where they may not always be in our eyesight. Like if they want to go to the mall or something, how you sit down and you have that talk about racism or what to be mindful of. Like you might go to the mall with your friends. You might see some people following you in the store. You might hear this, I see this, and you're already in a relaxing environment expressing to the child, these are some evils that exist out there that you're going to experience, that all the love in the world that I have for you can't keep you from experiencing that. So this is what it may look like. And you may feel this way. And these are some of the options that you have in the event you find yourself in these particular situations that are going to happen eventually. And I think that we do that anyway, and we didn't have a name for it, but that's something that we do.
No, it's very important, especially when it comes to sexual abuse. And I think that the younger, of course, depending on their age and how you're going to share it, share this information with your child.
Absolutely.
But like saying that strong no, right? Like this is your private area. Nobody's supposed to be touching it. If you have a little girl, you sit with your legs crossed, and you have to have those type of conversations, like you said, Lucretia, at a young age, because things, God forbid, may happen to your child, and then it's not till years later, and then you find out, you know what I mean? So again, having those hard truth conversations with your child at a young age. So like you said, whether they're with, I don't care if it's a family member, if it's a friend, a teacher, or, if they're at a school or you're at, a friend's house, they already are aware of what's supposed to happen and what's not supposed to happen. And and for them to feel safe to come back to you and say, mommy, this didn't look right. Or, he was looking at me a wrong way. And to feel like your child can come to you to express those concerns, regardless, like you said, whether it's the sexual abuse, physical, something going on at the mall. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And go ahead, Walanda.
Sorry, I'm glad that you ladies talked about that for our children. But one of the questions was like, how do we support those that are experiencing that trauma as an adult? So talking to our children, preparing them, and also making sure that they know, if you bring this to me, I'm not going to say you're lying. I'm not going to dismiss what you feel, which is sometimes the opposite. Like I talked about my clients who say they've experienced sexual assault, and the people around them was like, but it's your fault, pretty much. And how do we provide that safe space in being able for the adult people in our lives? And so I kind of want to just add to that real quick, if that's okay. First of all, learning the symptoms. PTSD, although it's kind of in the anxiety space, it's so much more than that. It's not solely like everything stresses me out. It's I experienced something that was super traumatic, whether it was chronic or acute. And it's it's just bigger than that. It's a whole physiological piece that goes along with that we already talked about. Listening to them, just like you would listen to a child. If a child
Yeah.
came and told you, hey, I watched my dad kill my mom, you're going to listen to that child the same way you can and it would be beneficial for you to listen to that adult. Offer social support. Create a space of safety where they feel like they can talk to you, and you're not going to gossip and tell other people their business. Anticipate their triggers. So if they're telling you like, hey, like we talked about the teenage boy watching his cousin, hey, this is what happened every time I see a red car. This is how I feel.
Yeah.
If you see it before them, or you know you're going to a car show, I mean, I don't know how you would do that, but being aware of that person's triggers, have a plan in place. If your friend or your family member does get triggered, how do they want you to help them respond? How can you support them in that? Remaining calm when they're having an episode, like you said about the children at school. If Johnny is not eating at home and he's having behavior problems, it does you no good to yell at them. It does no good for that situation.
Absolutely.
So being calm and of course encouraging them to get the treatment that they need.
And
so just wanted to kind of jump that in real quick because it was a question.
No, that's great. I think another thing too is I think family therapy, if the adult is willing and open for that, because it affects relationships, right? And just have a listening ear and just listening to them, of course, without judgment and without like, well, why didn't you? Or it's okay, let me hear you and try to understand what happened to you so that I can help you. As well as asking them, well, how can I help you? So sometimes we can assume like maybe he or she wants me to do this, or maybe he or she wants me to say this. It's like, no, ask them, how can I help you? How can how I want you to feel safe, and what does that look like to you? And again, like you said, every person deals with PTSD differently. So just because, Johnny, who was in a bad car accident that was diagnosed with PTSD, is doing better, that doesn't mean, somebody else in a very similar traumatic situation is going to deal with it the same way. So I think empathy is very important. Don't joke about it. I know, especially in our culture, we joke when it comes to like things that we really don't want to deal with. And it's so important to really validate that person's feelings and what they really went through.
I want to jump in. I like the tools and that you two ladies were talking about. If you find that there is an adult relative or friend who's going through things, and how we can support them. On our show, our listeners might often hear us talk about go to therapy or get a therapist, because we do
We're a little biased in that.
Yeah, we do
a little bit.
We advocate therapy,
Just a little bit.
and we know the benefits of it. But I think just to give you a quick story of why it's important. I had a coworker many, many years ago, and she had 3 sisters. She said that when she grew up, her father molested all of them. And authority was never called in. He was never punished. They were never removed from the home. The mother exercised, the girls are not supposed to be alone with the father. And that's how they were raised. So fast forward, years later, she's out the house. She's moved out of the state. She's very bitter. And she's a clinician. She's very bitter that nothing was ever done, like in terms of therapy for them or what have you. So she didn't have any children. Her sisters had children. And she would, preach that the father is not to be around those kids without an adult being present. And she said it so much, and she caused so much of a ruckus that the family didn't want her around. They said that when she came around, it was a lot of, tension in the house. And she was like, so you guys prefer me not to be a part of the family because I'm trying to be protective. But you're not getting rid of the actual perpetrator. And so I just brought up this story to say that, oftentimes, families try to figure out on their own what's the best way to handle something. Or you might have a person who's been hurt and they're telling their story, and people are tired of hearing it.
Wow.
And so by seeking therapy, like you said, you have a person who's actively listening, a person who this is not the first time they've heard these things,
Yeah.
and they validate you. You
Mhm.
understand what I'm saying? I think it's important that the family learn tools to be able to be supportive, but not necessarily try to fix the,
Right.
or you know, or
Right.
create a
Right.
space where they're going to make everything better. And so therapy can have be that ear, the unbiased, you know, ear, be supportive.
And to have a moderator, because you know we're gonna throw our bias out the window, we throw our opinions out the window, and it's facts of what's going on. And you know, again, like you shared, Lucretia, as a family member or a friend, we may throw in like, well, how do you know? Or you know, let's just say, 'cause I even had clients in DC where the son sexually molested a family member. The son was sexually abused, as well as come find out his mother was raped at the age of 6. And the mom never really got help for her own trauma, was in denial, didn't believe her son, and was so angry that the son sexually assaulted the little girl. So we had that therapy session to allow her to really break it all down of how hurt people, and how this adolescent boy was reacting the way that he thought was appropriate or not to hurt a little child, because the mom didn't even believe him when he told the mother that somebody abused him.
Wow.
You know, and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
You know, ladies, it's interesting. I know we thought we might incorporate some of the most recent events of this week, Capitol and PTSD, but it didn't happen. But I just want to say, this morning I was listening to NPR as I was going to work, and they were speaking to some of the African Americans officers who were present during when the people the
Capitol
terrorists stormed the Capitol, as well as some African American officers who've experienced trauma in the past and have won lawsuits, and they were talking about some of the most recent officers have spoken to them about being traumatized. Like some are not returning to work. And it's not even just about the domestic terrorists, it's about they saw their brethren in uniform escorting some of the terrorists into different parts of the Capitol and not supporting them, you know. So trauma can look
so different.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
So
do you know that one of the officers actually committed suicide?
what? Say that. Who now?
One of the Capitol police officers actually committed suicide the day after.
What
rioting.
was his skin color?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It'd be interesting to
but like, but I just think
suicide on any level is horrible. But it would be interesting to because right now things are too big. You got some officers who were aiding and abetting. You have some officers who were, you know what I mean? It's all over the place right now. And so oh God, just pray for them.
And I asked because I wondered, you know, what side they were on.
Were they being prosecuted?
Re-traumatization? Like what, you know, could have been a motivation to that.
Yeah.
Or maybe none of the above. Maybe they were already struggling with mental health. But my first mind, because it was such a racially charged incident, especially being in comparison to BLM, I was wondering the skin color.
No, absolutely.
And then I think it's really sad because, and like we continue to talk about, let's just say he was African American, right, who committed suicide, who was an officer. If you really look at trauma, you don't know if he had trauma growing up. So let's just say he was from Chicago, right? Right. So he's a Black male, dealt with personal trauma. Now you're a Black officer. You probably dealt with trauma of what you've seen for homicidal, crimes, and you have to actually see the dead person, right? Then let's just say, you're not getting help and you're not getting the support that you need to really digest all that you've been experiencing, on top of maybe now you're an officer at the Capitol. And that's a lot on your mental. I mean, it's a lot. So again, you really don't know what people go through.
I definitely think we may need to have a part 2 for PTSD,
Definitely.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
And
it's a lot.
if we said anything that that's triggering our listeners or what have you, you find yourself, thinking that you might need help, please, you know, call a
Reach
helpline.
out.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you know, and don't keep it inside. Have the conversation with a loved one at minimum, and go
On
to
our, we have a page,
yeah, absolutely.
Mindful Moments page on Facebook. So you definitely can leave us messages there. We
Yeah,
can't provide therapy on that page,
right.
but we can definitely try to provide resources if you're in need of those.
And
Absolutely.
we'll also jot down the hotlines in the chat box as well
Mhm.
for anybody that needs it.
All right.
So thank you so much, everyone, for
Yeah.
tuning in. I know this was a really deep conversation, but it was definitely a conversation that we felt like it was needed
Yeah.
for everyone. So, but yeah, again, we're all here to support one another. We have a Facebook page. So definitely, if you want to inbox us and you have some more information or concerns and how we can help you or a loved one, definitely do that. So thank you.
Thank you guys.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye.